My daughter-in-law did not know I owned the building she lived in. She did not know I owned the downtown office tower where her prestigious law firm paid a premium every month for the top 3 floors. She did not know I controlled nearly half of the equity in the firm that had just made her a partner. And she definitely did not know that the old woman standing in her marble kitchen, holding a warm casserole dish wrapped in foil, was the primary stakeholder who had signed the documents approving her partnership compensation package just 4 days earlier. All Lydia knew was the story she had decided to believe years ago. She believed I was Simon's sweet, simple little mother, a modest widow who lived alone in an aging ranch house at the edge of the suburbs. A harmless, slightly pathetic woman who bought her clothes off the rack, wore sensible walking shoes, and drove a 10-year-old Buick. To Lydia, I was someone to be tolerated during the holidays, seated near the food table where I could be safely ignored and never, ever introduced to important people. So on the night of her promotion party, while her sprawling house, filled with senior attorneys, managing partners, and wealthy corporate clients, Lydia looked across her gleaming marble kitchen, pointed her manicured finger directly at me, and said, "Simon, get this embarrassment out of my house before the Carstairs see her." My son went completely white. The laughter and conversation in the immediate vicinity died instantly. The room went so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the luxury refrigerator. I did not gasp. I did not drop the casserole dish. I set my glass of water down on the marble counter. I placed it very gently, making sure the condensation didn't leave a ring on her imported stone. Then I looked at my daughter-in-law. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my hurt show in my eyes. I simply said, "Could you point me to the door, dear? I think I'd like to go home." I did not argue. I did not tell her who I was. I did not tell her that Northlake Quill, LLC, the holding company buried deep in her law firm's operating documents, belonged to me. I simply walked out. But when I got home, I did not go to sleep. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the small kitchen table of my modest ranch house, and called my attorney. "Esther," I said when she answered, "bring me the Bristol, Lane and Kittredge file, the Alderbrook mortgage file, and my will." "Harriet," Esther asked, her voice sharp with sudden concern, "it's past midnight. What kind of changes are we making?" "The clarifying kind," I replied. A week later, I walked into the same mahogany boardroom where Lydia thought powerful people made decisions about people like me. Only this time, everyone at the table stood up when I entered. "My name is Harriet Langford. I'm 67 years old, and I have been a widow for 19 years. When my husband Warren died of a sudden heart attack, he left me with a profound, hollow grief, a teenage son named Simon, and a sprawling, quietly massive real estate empire. Warren and I had built the Langford Property Group from nothing. We started by buying a single dilapidated strip mall in the late 70s. By the time he died, we owned over 50 commercial and residential buildings across the state. But we never lived like wealthy people. Warren believed that wealth was a tool, not an identity. We lived in the same comfortable ranch house we bought when Simon was a baby. We didn't join country clubs. We didn't buy yachts. When Warren passed, I made a conscious decision to keep the full extent of our wealth hidden from Simon. I didn't do it out of greed or a desire for control. I did it because I loved my son. I had seen too many children of wealth grow up to be soft, entitled, and utterly useless. I wanted Simon to know the value of a hard day's work. I wanted him to build his own life, face his own struggles, and learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. It worked. Simon grew into a kind, hard-working man. He became an architect, earning a solid, respectable living. Then he met Lydia. They met during her final year of law school. Lydia was brilliant, razor-sharp, and wildly ambitious. She had grown up in a working-class family and spent her entire life running away from it. She was terrified of being perceived as common. She equated human value entirely with status, zip codes, and job titles. I saw it clearly the first time I met her. But Simon loved her, and he was happy. So I welcomed her into the family. I played the part of the sweet, simple mother-in-law. When they got married and started looking for a house, they fell in love with a beautiful property in Shaker Heights, the Alderbrook Lane house. It was far outside their budget. Lydia was devastated, talking endlessly about how living in that neighborhood was essential for her networking at the firm. So I stepped in. I told them I had some savings from a life insurance policy, and I offered them $80,000 for the down payment. Lydia accepted the money with a tight, patronizing smile, acting as if I had handed her my meager life savings in a coffee can. What she didn't know was that I owned the Alderbrook Lane house. It was part of a residential portfolio managed by one of my LLCs. I had my lawyer structure the $80,000 not as a gift, but as a private, zero-interest mortgage loan. I did it to protect Simon in case the marriage ever fell apart, ensuring I held the primary lien on the property. I never intended to collect a dime of it. I considered it a gift, but Lydia only saw what she wanted to see. She saw an old woman in a cheap dress who had scraped together a few pennies to help her son. Over the years, as she climbed the ranks at her law firm, Bristol, Lane and Kittredge LLP, her disdain for me became more pronounced. She began talking to me with the slow, exaggerated patience one uses with a confused toddler. She excluded me from their social gatherings, inviting me only to children's birthday parties for my 3-year-old granddaughter, Nell. And then she made partner. 4 days before her promotion party, my private attorney, Esther Bell, called me on my secure line. "Harriet," Esther said, "the managing committee at Bristol, Lane and Kittredge, just sent over the quarterly partnership packages for stakeholder review. As the principal of Northlake Quill, we need your signature to authorize the equity distribution." Northlake Quill was a holding company Warren had set up decades ago to diversify our assets. Through it, we had provided the initial capital to rescue Bristol, Lane and Kittredge, when they were a struggling boutique firm. In exchange, Northlake Quill held a 46% stake in the firm. I technically owned the chairs they sat in. "Who is on the list this quarter, Esther?" I asked, sipping my morning coffee. "3 senior associates. One of them is Lydia Langford." I smiled softly. Despite her flaws, I knew how hard Lydia worked. She billed 80-hour weeks. She missed family dinners. She earned it. "Approve it, Esther," I said. "Authorize the full compensation package." I'm proud of her. I signed the paperwork digitally, feeling a genuine sense of warmth toward my daughter-in-law. 4 days later, I drove my old Buick to Shaker Heights for her promotion party. The street was lined with Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas. I parked 2 blocks away to avoid blocking the driveway. I was wearing a simple navy dress, comfortable, unassuming. I carried a heavy Pyrex dish containing a baked ziti, Simon's favorite comfort food. I thought it would be a nice touch among the catered caviar and truffles. I walked through the front door into a house vibrating with the aggressive energy of high-stakes networking. Men in tailored suits and women in designer cocktail dresses held crystal glasses, laughing loudly at each other's jokes. I navigated through the crowd toward the kitchen. As I set the casserole dish down on the marble island, a young associate attorney in a sharp gray suit bumped into me. He spilled a few drops of red wine on his cuff. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered, glaring at me. He snapped his fingers. "You, catering. Get me some club soda and a napkin right now." I blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry I don't work. Just get it," he said dismissively, turning back to his conversation. Before I could correct him, Lydia appeared. She was wearing a stunning black designer dress, her hair perfectly styled. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin, and pulled me away from the island. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and furious. "I was invited, Lydia," I said gently, trying to pull my arm free. "Simon told me the party started at 8. "It's a networking event, Harriet, not a family barbecue," she snapped, looking around nervously. "These are senior partners. These are federal judges. What are you wearing?" "It's a navy dress," I said, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. "It looks like you bought it at a yard sale," she whispered viciously. "Listen to me. Just stand over there by the buffet. Eat some shrimp. And for the love of God, do not talk to anyone." I stood by the buffet for an hour. I watched my son navigate the room, looking uncomfortable, but trying his best to support his wife. I watched my 3-year-old granddaughter, Nell, sleeping upstairs on the baby monitor. I drank water. I stayed quiet. And then Eleanor Carstairs walked into the kitchen. Eleanor and her husband, Martin, were legacy clients of the firm. They were old money, deeply embedded in the city's commercial real estate sector. I knew Eleanor. 15 years ago, my holding company had outbid her husband for a prime block of downtown commercial space. She knew exactly who I was. "Yeah." Eleanor stopped in the middle of the kitchen, her eyes widening as she looked at me standing near the chafing dishes. "Harriet," Eleanor said loudly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Harriet Langford? Good heavens, what on earth are you doing here?" The kitchen went quiet. Several lawyers turned to look. Lydia materialized instantly, a frantic, panicked smile plastered on her face. She stepped between Eleanor and me, completely blocking me from view. "Eleanor, Martin, so glad you could make it," Lydia chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She waved a hand dismissively in my direction without looking at me. "Oh, don't mind her. That's just Simon's sweet little mother. She lives out in the suburbs. She brought a casserole." Lydia laughed, a high, nervous sound, clearly expecting Eleanor to join in the dismissal of the quaint, unimportant woman. Eleanor didn't laugh. She looked at Lydia as if the younger woman had just lost her mind. "Lydia, do you have any idea who?" "Simon," Lydia called out sharply, cutting Eleanor off. Simon hurried into the kitchen, looking anxious. "Yes, Lyd?" Lydia leaned in close to her husband, but in the sudden silence of the kitchen, her voice carried perfectly. "Simon, get this embarrassment out of my house before the Carstairs see her." Simon froze. He looked at me, then at his wife. All the color drained from his face. "Lydia, that's my mother. I don't care," Lydia hissed, her obsession with status finally blinding her to basic human decency. "She's ruining my night. Get her out." I didn't wait for Simon to speak. I looked at Lydia. I saw the fear beneath her anger, the desperate, clawing terror of a woman who believed that if she wasn't standing next to the right people, she was nothing at all. She did not insult me, because she knew nothing about me. She insulted me because she thought there was nothing worth knowing. I set my water glass down on the counter. Could you point me to the door, dear? I asked calmly. I think I'd like to go home. I walked out the front door into the cool night air. I heard Simon calling my name, running down the driveway after me. Mom! Mom, wait, please, he begged, grabbing my arm. He looked devastated, tears shining in his eyes. I'm so sorry. She's just stressed. She drank too much. Go back inside, Simon, I said softly, touching his cheek. Take care of your wife. And check on Nell, Mom. I can't let you leave like this, he pleaded. Go inside, I repeated, my voice firm. I got into my old Buick and drove away. I cried for the first 10 minutes of the drive. I cried because it hurt to be treated like garbage by the woman raising my granddaughter. But by the time I pulled into the driveway of my ranch house, the tears had stopped. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the phone, and called Esther Bell. Bring me the Bristol, Lane and Kittredge file, the Alderbrook mortgage file, and my will, I said. It was time for the sweet little mother to die, and it was time for the principal stakeholder of North Lake Quill to go to work. The drive to Esther Bell's office the next morning was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I just watched the familiar streets of my city slide past the windows of my old Buick. Esther was waiting for me in her private conference room. We had worked together for 22 years. She was the one who had helped me and Warren transition the Langford Property Group into a series of highly insulated holding companies, protecting our privacy and our assets. She knew exactly what I was worth, down to the penny. Spread across the polished oak table were 3 manila folders. I've drafted everything you asked for, Harriet, Esther said, her expression serious. She sat across from me and tapped the first folder. This is a formal partnership review letter. As the principal stakeholder of North Lake Quill, you have the right to request a secondary review of any newly approved compensation packages. If I file this today, Lydia's promotion will be suspended pending a boardroom hearing. File it, I said, my voice steady. Esther nodded, opening the second folder. She pulled out a single heavy envelope. This is the mortgage call. The $80,000 you provided for the Alderbrook Lane house was legally structured as a private mortgage with a 60-day call option. If I serve this to Simon and Lydia, they will have exactly 2 months to pay the entire balance in full, or you have the right to foreclose and take the house. I looked at the heavy envelope. It felt like a loaded gun sitting on the table. Seal it, I said. Put it in my personal safe. Do not send it. Esther raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. She slid the envelope back into the folder and opened the final one. Your will, she said softly. I took a deep breath. Remove Lydia Langford as a contingent beneficiary entirely. Restructure Simon's inheritance into a marital protected trust. If they divorce, she will not be entitled to a single brick of the Langford property group. Done, Esther said, making a note with her pen. And Nell, set up a separate irrevocable trust for Nell, I instructed. $5 million designated for education and life skills. It unlocks at age 25. Lydia is to have zero signing authority over it. Esther finished writing, capped her pen, and looked at me. Harriet, you have the power to completely destroy her career and take her house in the span of 60 days. Are you sure you don't want to use the mortgage call? I don't want to destroy my family. Esther, I said, standing up. I just want to introduce them to the woman they've been ignoring. I drove back to the ranch house and called Simon. I told him to come over immediately, and I told him to come alone. He arrived an hour later, looking exhausted and defensive. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, look," he started, his voice tight. "I'm so sorry about last night." Lydia was completely out of line. She was stressed, she had too much champagne, and she felt overwhelmed by the partners being there. "But you leaving like that," it caused a scene. I let him finish. I poured him a cup of coffee and set it on the table. "Sit down, Simon," I said. He hesitated, sensing the shift in my tone. He sat down. "I didn't call you here to talk about last night," I said. I pulled a large, thick binder from the counter and dropped it onto the table in front of him. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. Simon looked at the binder, confused. "What is this?" "Open it." He flipped open the cover. The first page was a master ledger for the Langford Property Group. His eyes scanned the numbers, his brow furrowing. He flipped to the next page, a list of commercial properties downtown. Next page, a portfolio of residential apartment complexes. He looked up at me, his face pale. "Mom, whose financials are these?" "They are mine," I said quietly. "Mine and your father's." Simon stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand. Dad left you this house and a small life insurance policy. Your father and I built a real estate company from the ground up," I corrected him. "We owned over 50 properties by the time he died. The income from those properties is in the 8 figures annually." 8 figures. Simon choked out, looking back at the binder. "But you drive a 10-year-old car. You clip coupons. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this?" I sat across from him. "Because your father and I watched too many families let money ruin their children. We wanted you to know the value of work. We wanted you to earn your own life, not inherit ours. And you did, Simon. You became a good, hard-working man." Simon ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "But the house? When Lydia and I bought the house, you gave us $80,000. Lydia said it was your entire retirement savings. It was petty cash from one of my residential holding accounts," I said bluntly. "And I did not give it to you. I structured it as a private mortgage loan. I did it because I wanted to ensure that if anything ever happened, I held the primary lien on the house to protect you." Simon looked sick. He realized instantly how Lydia had treated me for years, believing I was poor. And he realized he had allowed it to happen. "There is one more thing you need to know," I said. I flipped the binder to the final tab. It contained the operating documents for North Lake Quill LLC. 20 years ago, I explained, your father and I provided seed capital to a struggling law firm. In exchange, we took equity. Through this holding company, I own 46% of Bristol Lane and Kittredge. Simon stopped breathing. He stared at the name of his wife's law firm. "I am the principal stakeholder," I said softly. "I own the building they rent. And 4 days ago, I was the one who signed the executive order approving your wife's partnership." Simon stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. He backed away from the table, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Mom, what are you going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling. "She insulted you in front of the car stairs. Are you going to block her partnership? Are you going to ruin her career?" "I am not a vengeful woman, Simon," I said, remaining seated. "I didn't tell you this to ruin your wife. I told you this because you have been living in the dark. I am putting the truth on the table. What am I supposed to do with it?" he asked desperately. "Whatever you choose," I said gently. "You are my son, but you are her husband. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be. I suggest you go home and have a long conversation with your wife. I didn't sleep well that night. The silence in the ranch house felt heavier than usual. I had detonated a bomb in my son's marriage, and I didn't know what the collateral damage would be. At 7:15 the next morning, the doorbell rang. I tied my robe, walked through the living room, and opened the front door. Lydia stood on the porch. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized college sweatshirt. She wore absolutely no makeup. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was shivering slightly in the morning chill. In her arms, she held my 3-year-old granddaughter, Nell, who was still asleep, her head resting on Lydia's shoulder. Lydia looked at me. The arrogant, status-obsessed lawyer who had pointed me toward the door was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, exhausted woman who had just realized the entire foundation of her life was built on sand. Simon told me everything, Lydia whispered, her voice cracking. I looked at her, then at my sleeping granddaughter. Come inside, I said. Lydia stepped into the house. She carried Nell to the living room sofa, laid her down gently, and covered her with a knitted blanket I kept on the armchair. Then Lydia turned to face me. She didn't try to put on a brave face. She didn't try to use her lawyerly rhetoric. She just stood in my modest living room and cried. I don't even know what to say, Lydia sobbed, wiping her face with the sleeves of her sweatshirt. I know there's nothing I can say that will make this right. I know you own the firm. I know you can take everything away from me. I need to try anyway. Then try, Lydia, I said softly, standing by the fireplace. She took a shaky breath. I grew up in a trailer park, Harriet. My dad drove a forklift and drank away his paycheck, and my mom cleaned houses for rich people in the suburbs. I spent my entire childhood wearing hand-me-down clothes, feeling like I was invisible, feeling like I was nothing. She looked down at her hands. When I got into law school, I promised myself I would never be that small again, she continued. I obsessed over networking. I obsessed over the right zip code, the right clothes, the right firm. And when I met you, you lived in this small house. You wore simple clothes. You reminded me so much of the life I was terrified of sliding back into. So I looked down on you. I told myself I was better than you, because if I wasn't, then all my expensive suits and fancy parties meant nothing. I listened to her. I heard the pain in her voice, the genuine, deep-seated fear that had driven her behavior for years. I am so sorry, Harriet, she wept. I was so cruel to you. And you were the one quietly paying for my house. You were the one who signed my promotion. You're not small. I'm small. I'm the smallest person in the world. She sank onto the armchair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. I walked over and sat on the edge of the coffee table, directly in front of her. Look at me, Lydia, I said. She lowered her hands, looking at me with red, terrified eyes. I accept your explanation, I said quietly, but I do not accept it as an excuse. You cannot use your childhood trauma as a shield to justify treating another human being like garbage. You judged me entirely by my sweater and my car. But do you know what hurt the most? Lydia shook her head slightly. The words you used at the party were cruel, I said. But the real tragedy, Lydia, is that in 5 years of marriage to my son, you never once asked me about my life. You never asked how I met Warren. You never asked what I did for a living before I retired. You decided years ago that there was nothing about me worth knowing. Lydia closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. Forgiveness is not a reset button, I told her, my voice firm but not unkind. I am not going to pretend Saturday night didn't happen. The dynamic between us has changed forever. Lydia swallowed hard. Simon said, you filed a partnership review. Are you going to block my promotion? I looked at my granddaughter sleeping peacefully on the sofa. I thought about the power I held. I could crush Lydia's career with a single phone call. I could call the mortgage on her house and force her into bankruptcy. But power is not proven by how much you can destroy. Sometimes it is proven by what you choose not to touch. No, I said, I am not going to block your promotion. I am going to attend the review, and I am going to confirm it. Lydia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Furthermore, I continued, I am having Esther draft the paperwork to formally forgive the $80,000 mortgage on your house. It will be converted into a gift because Nell deserves a secure home, and I will not hold a sword over my granddaughter's roof. Lydia slid off the armchair onto her knees, weeping openly. Harriet, why? Why are you doing this for me? I am not doing it for you, I said gently. I am doing it for Simon and for Nell. I reached out and placed a hand on Lydia's shaking shoulder. But I have one condition, I said. Lydia looked up, desperate. Anything. Name it. Every month on the first Sunday, I said, you, Simon, and Nell will come to this house for dinner. You will be here for 3 hours. All cell phones will be turned off and left in a basket by the front door. You will not talk about the law firm. You will not talk about networking. We are going to sit at my cheap kitchen table, and we are going to learn how to be a family, a real one. Lydia stared at me. She had expected me to demand equity or public apologies or groveling obedience. Instead, I demanded her time. I promise, Lydia whispered, her voice fierce with gratitude. I promise, Harriet. 3 days later, I drove downtown to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Bristol Lane and Kittredge LLP. I didn't wear a cheap dress. I wore a tailored charcoal gray wool suit that I had bought specifically for meetings with my financial advisors. I carried a classic black leather briefcase. I looked exactly like what I was, the matriarch of an 8-figure real estate empire. When I stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, the receptionist asked for my name. Harriet Langford, I said. I am here for the partnership review. The receptionist's eyes widened. She quickly picked up the phone. Mrs. Langford is here. 2 minutes later, one of the senior managing partners hurried into the lobby. He extended his hand, looking slightly nervous. Mrs. Langford, it is an absolute honor. We've communicated with Esther Bell for years, but the committee has never had the pleasure of meeting the principal of Northlake Quill in person. Thank you, I said smoothly. Shall we? He led me down a long, glass-walled corridor and opened the heavy double doors to the main boardroom. Seated around the massive mahogany table were the 7 most powerful lawyers in the firm. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking pale and terrified in a sharp navy suit, was Lydia. She didn't know I was coming. Simon hadn't told her that Northlake Quill was the entity calling the review. When Lydia saw me walk through the doors, her jaw dropped. The senior partners immediately stood up as I entered the room. Lydia slowly stood up as well, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She looked from me to the managing partner and back to me. The reality of my power in that room was absolute, and it hit her with the force of a freight train. Please sit down, I said, taking the chair at the head of the table. The managing partner cleared his throat. Mrs. Langford, as the representative of North Lake Quill, you requested a review of the compensation package and partnership elevation for Lydia Langford. Lydia stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She thought I had lied to her. She thought I had brought her here to publicly humiliate her in front of the very people she worshiped, to strip her of her promotion and destroy her career exactly the way she had tried to banish me from her house. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the partnership dossier. I laid it flat on the table. I have reviewed the billable hours, the client retention rates, and the litigation record of Lydia Langford, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent boardroom. I looked directly into my daughter-in-law's eyes. Her work is exceptional, I stated. She is a brilliant attorney who has earned her place at this table through merit and dedication. North Lake Quill confirms her partnership without objection. Lydia let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears springing to her eyes. Furthermore, I continued, looking at the managing committee, due to our familial relationship, I am formally recusing myself and North Lake Quill from any future financial or disciplinary decisions regarding Lydia Langford's career at this firm. She will stand or fall on her own merits without any influence from my holding company. The managing partner nodded respectfully. Understood, Mrs. Langford, and thank you. The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. I shook hands with the committee members and walked out to the elevator bank. As I waited for the doors to open, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Harriet! I turned around. Lydia was practically running down the hallway. She stopped in front of me, completely ignoring the associates and paralegals walking past. Before I could say a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, hugging me tightly. Thank you, she whispered against my shoulder, her voice shaking. Thank you for not destroying me. Thank you for protecting me. I hugged her back, patting her shoulder gently. Congratulations on making partner, Lydia. You earned it. 14 months later, it was the first Sunday of November. The front door of my ranch house opened, and the chaos of family spilled into the hallway. Simon carried a stack of firewood. Lydia carried a large, slightly lopsided covered dish, and 4-year-old Nell ran straight toward the kitchen. Gamma Harriet! Nell shrieked, colliding with my legs. There's my girl! I laughed, scooping her up and kissing her cheek. Simon kissed my forehead, dropping the wood by the fireplace. Lydia walked into the kitchen, wearing jeans and a comfortable sweater. She placed the dish on the counter. I tried making an apple cobbler, Lydia said, looking nervously at the dish. The crust got a little burned on the edges, and I think I used too much cinnamon. I'm sure it's wonderful, Lydia, I smiled. And it was terrible. The crust was hard enough to crack a tooth, and the cinnamon was overpowering. But we all ate it, and we all smiled, because Lydia had spent 3 hours making it with her own hands instead of buying it from an expensive bakery. We had held 13 Sunday dinners since that morning in my living room. We had only missed one when Nell had a stomach bug. Every single time, Simon and Lydia turned off their phones and put them in the basket by the door. Things were not perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness. There were still times when Lydia's ambition flared up and she had to consciously rein it in. But she was trying. Simon had changed too. Knowing the truth about our family's wealth had forced him to reevaluate his own path. He had asked to join the junior advisory board of the Langford Property Group. I made him start at the bottom reviewing municipal zoning codes. He wasn't inheriting the company, he was learning how to run it. Warren would have been proud. After dinner, while Simon and Nell were in the living room, building a tower out of wooden blocks, Lydia stood next to me at the kitchen sink, helping me wash the dishes. I saw the new building acquisition for Langford Group in the Business Journal this week, Lydia said quietly, handing me a dried plate. It was a brilliant move, Harriet. Thank you, I said. She looked at me, a genuine soft smile on her face. You really are incredible, you know that? I'm just a sweet little mother, Lydia, I teased gently. Lydia laughed, bumping her shoulder playfully against mine. Never again. Later that night, after they had gone home, I walked into my home office. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Lying there, untouched, was the sealed envelope containing the mortgage call document. I picked it up. I hadn't shredded it. I hadn't destroyed it. I gave my son the truth. What he did with it belonged to him. I forgave my daughter-in-law. I gave her a second chance to be the woman my family needed. But forgiveness is a gift. Memory is the lock on the drawer. I placed the envelope back into the bottom drawer and locked it with a small brass key. I didn't think I would ever need to open it again. I hoped I wouldn't. But I kept it because being a good person and being a strong person are not two different things. They are exactly the same thing. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story gave you something to think about, please leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss the stories to come.